In this video, we have two tasks. The first is to review the FeiyuTech G6Max gimbal, and the second is to tire him out. You got a big enough stick there, Rust? Alright, let's see you catch this. That was a little close for comfort. But I've tried FeiyuTech products in the past. I tried their AK2000 a few months ago, and overall, I felt it was a really good gimbal for the money compared to things like the Moser Air 2. But the problem with both of those gimbals for me is they're huge. While the AK2000 might have a maximum payload limit of 2.8 kilos, it does stand at nearly 40 centimeters tall, weighing over 1,200 grams, and has a retail price of around £350. By comparison, the G6Max has a retail price of only £270, is not only shorter at 29 centimeters, but also substantially lighter at 665 grams, although the maximum payload limit of that is only 1.2 kilos, which equates to around the weight of the Sony a7 III fitted with the Tokina 20mm f2. However, I found once you put a microphone into that combination, it tips the scales just a little too much and the gimbal's not able to handle it. It seems to be more designed for smartphones, GoPros, action cams, but it can do small mirrorless bodies, i.e. the A6400. Are you not coming? Well, he's going to need a shower when we get home. And being an overall much smaller gimbal, it's far easier for me to take when I'm traveling to places. Trying to take the AK2000 or the Moser Air is just too much. You need its own bag to carry it around. This I can fit quite easily inside my usual backpack with everything else as well. And there's a couple of little features about this that make that little bit better. For example, there's small lock switches on each of the joints. The lock switches are located underneath each of the axis motors, and when engaged stop the arms from moving around at all, making it ideal for when you're wanting to transport the gimbal around. It's also got Wi-Fi connectivity, so you can hook it up to your phone and use the FeiyuTech app, which allows you to make control adjustments and change certain settings through the app. Usually on these walks, you guarantee he goes hunting for plastic bottles. That's all he cares about, and today he picks the biggest friggin' log he can find. I do like the FeiyuTech app, but it's a little bit basic. Compared to the Moser app, for example, with that, you can set up your time lapses within the app. You do everything internal. Whereas with this, the FeiyuTech one, you can set certain parameters like your interval timing and how long it's going to take to complete the pan, but you've still then got to set up the panning start and end point within the gimbal. And that does kind of limit you to a single plane of panning, whereas with the Moser you can set more of an arc, which is a little bit better, although I don't do many time lapses, so it doesn't really affect me. Incidentally, I do not like the setup of this, trying to remember how to access the different modes. Why couldn't they just put basic buttons on it that just says, this is panning, this is tilt lock, this is roll lock, this is everything lock? Rather than the PlayStation controller setup of you've got to push this button 4 times, then that button twice, then you've got to turn around and do jive hands. The biggest issue I've found with the G6Max overall is actually balancing the camera to begin with. The materials used have quite a bit of friction and make it quite difficult to fine-tune the position of the camera in order to get perfect balance, so you will have to persevere. Although one little aspect of the G6 which I personally like, some people might not, is the battery setup. So on the AK2000 and the Moser Air 2, in fact probably a lot of big gimbals, you have separate batteries that you have to take out to put on charge. or you might be able to charge them with the gimbal, but either way, they're separate batteries. This is an entirely onboard battery that you can only charge using USB. Now, some people might consider that a downside, because then if the gimbal goes flat, you have to charge the gimbal up rather than just change the batteries and off you go again. However, by incorporating the battery into the handle rather than having a compartment for them, it does allow them to keep the size down, or the battery as big as it can be. On the topic of battery life, however, it's a little bit unsure of itself. You get a little 4-bar battery indicator on the gimbal, but it was fully charged when I started, then it dropped to 3 bars, then before it was somewhere down about 1 and I thought it was going to die, and now it's back up to 3. But to be fair, at no point have I ever used it long enough to actually flatten it, so it's not bad on battery life. The battery in the G6Max has a capacity of 2200 milliamps, which FeiyuTech state is good for around 9 hours worth of usage. But that's based on a payload of only 600 grams, which is obviously half what the gimbal is capable of. Using heavier payloads will reduce the battery life that you see. However, one point about the USB that I despise on this is the USB cover. It's an absolute nuisance to try and get open. It's got a USB Type-C port, which is a plus point. I think everything should be USB Type-C these days. But it's got a little rubber gasket that covers the front of it, and I can never for the life of me get my fingernail in to actually latch it out. There have been times where I've literally been standing there for minutes trying to open the USB port, sometimes without success. I am really tempted to just lob the thing off entirely and just hope it doesn't get wet. Incidentally, I've just discovered a new feature of this gimbal, which is the apparent ease and randomness of it to be able to change language. Now, the first vlog that I shot with this was over Christmas when I was in Ireland, and it was that one about why you shouldn't do work for free. But I was shooting with this for the first time, trying it out. And towards the end of the vlog, I noticed that suddenly all of the menus were in Chinese. So clearly I'd somehow managed to accidentally change them without realizing. Well, I've done it again. And while you can change many of the gimbal settings through the app, including resetting the parameters, you can't change the language settings. Seems the only way you can actually do that is to guess your way through the menus until you find the word English. No idea how I've done it, haven't even been touching the menus, but it does go to highlight what I was saying earlier about the nuisance of the user interface with this. You've got to push all these random buttons to do different things. Even to this point, I'm not entirely sure which button actually accesses the menu to begin with. I always forget. I just end up having to push them all and see which one works, because none of them are labelled menu. But to be fair, apart from the nuisance menu setting to try and keep you on your toes and the crap USB port, it's actually a really good gimbal. Certainly for this sort of setup is as good in usability as any of the bigger gimbals, with the added benefit that it's also a lot smaller and lighter. It's obviously completely useless if you're trying to use big cameras, big gimbal setups, but for anything like this, a small vlog setup, it seems to be almost ideal. It's certainly more stable than at least most in-body stabilizations that I've seen. I definitely get a more stable setup with this A6400 with no IBIS on a gimbal than I would from the A7 III with IBIS and no gimbal. Now, admittedly, gimbal plus IBIS would be absolutely ideal. In fact, gimbal plus IBIS plus optical stabilization, whew! But neither of these lenses have optical stabilization, and like I said, the A7 III appears to be too heavy for the gimbal to handle. A65 or A6600, however, on for a winner. Now I just need someone to make a 16mm 1.4 with optical stabilization, and everyone's happy. But that pretty much wraps it up for this video, guys. As always, if you have any questions or queries, comment box is down below. While you're down there, if you haven't already, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and there is also a link to my Patreon account and merch store as well. Thank you so much for stopping by. He's a bloody muddy mess, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.